Yesterday, the Moonshots mate have convened, but Alex could not make it, so he sent his body print.
Alex, please meet
That's flesh.
Celine.
That's
Our meat puppets
maybe.
meet for the first
This
time.
proves nothing. Nothing.
We've been 3D printing him for a
There
month
has
now.
been conjecture for the last year or so whether Alex is an AI.
I am freshly bioprinted. Post-scarce inspirational videos are already baked in. I would be disappointed if by the time we get to September, if we don't have 1,000 videos of ultra-high inspirational quality generated for nearly free at this point.
Could you please give us an example of historical linear thinking?
T.J. Watson, IBM founder, once remarking that there would be a global market for exactly 5 computers. And I wonder whether we'll look back and say, okay, maybe there will be at most 5 major American model providers as maybe artificially limiting the future of the light cone. I think it's going to be much, much larger. I thought it was interesting, Eric's comments on the San Francisco consensus, which he characterizes as, I think, recursive self-improvement being some point in the future.
Wait, could you remind me what's the title of the book that you guys have co-written?
What does your t-shirt say, Peter?
It says, solve everything. What does yours say, by the way?
Mine says,
Let there be agents.
There be agents.
Yes.
Could you give us a hint about the title of your next book, Alex?
This is the whole point, though, that of this book that we just co-authored, that we get superintelligence, and the killer app, arguably, of superintelligence is solving everything, including all of these high-profile, glamorous scientific and engineering challenges. It's happening.
Yeah, but this is AI. Like, how do you want to solve like physical things?
Because everything. So friend of the pod, Ray, as I think Ray would say, everything's becoming software. And when we have superintelligence solving all disease, it's a software problem. If we can create a virtual cell that perfectly models diseased states and we can steer through cell embedding space to get from diseased cell to healthy cell, it's a software problem. Everything's becoming a software problem. It's all just a software problem.
We're getting
At which
there
point,
pretty quickly.
a coding model can do essentially anything in the physical world.
All right, fill us in on the intelligence explosion.
Okay, so benchmarks go up and to the right, news at 11. Except that in this case, one of my favorite benchmarks is the Frontier Math Tier 4 benchmark, which, for those of you paying close attention, Frontier Math Tier 4 from Epic AI captures the ability of AI models to solve what are considered research-level problems in math that would require a team of professional mathematicians several weeks to solve. They are already solved, but nonetheless very challenging problems.
All right, cool. So we can solve everything in software, but that requires the intelligence explosion to continue. What are the stats?
And now with GPT 5.4 turned up to maximum reasoning capability, we're seeing finally, and this was a prediction, I think, in our prediction episode, math is cooked. We're seeing, I think, 38% capability, 38% of all of these problems that are high difficulty, professional mathematician, research level problems are now solvable by AI. And there are even rumors, even in the past 24 to 48 hours, that the next tier up, the so-called open problems benchmark, that 5.4 is reportedly rumored to be on the verge of solving the first open, hard math problem. So math, I think, is in some sense the bellwether. It's the canary that owns the coal mine, that all of these fields, math, science, engineering, medicine, these are all going to be solve everything, by AI, and that's incredibly exciting.
Could you please destroy the haters who will scream data wall at you?
There was no data ceiling. It was completely illusory. And I think history will look back at this moment and say, in the same sense that we used, say, petroleum, oil products in the ground that were left by past generations of living beings to bootstrap ourselves to the era of solar and fission and fusion. Similarly, the internet, which was collected by a bunch of fat fingers punching keyboards and uploading content from the collective human experience to the internet just so we could compress it and pre-train our large language models, that was just the biological bootloader for an era of synthetic data when we don't need pre-trained human data from internet posts anymore. Now it can all be synthetic. We've reached orbit, we've reached escape velocity, and now it's synthetic data from here on out.
Last week, the Department of War started to hate Anthropic, so the entire population started to love Anthropic.
It's the Streisand effect. Let's call it what it is. It's the Streisand effect. Pay no attention to Claude. Everyone uses it. I think every history shows, the past few years, every attempt to pause any form of frontier capabilities ends up being a net accelerant to capabilities. If you remember, a couple of years ago, our friend Max's Pause AI movement for 6 months. What did that do? Maybe on margin, it slowed down OpenAI capabilities a little bit. everyone else shot ahead, and it was a net accelerant, brought more competition to the space, and ultimately we find ourselves in a race state where capabilities are shooting ahead to the extent that any of the interaction of the past month or so between Anthropic and the Department of War ends up on the margin decelerating Anthropic's capabilities or their ability to go to market, even if it's marginal at best. That's going to be a net accelerant to the entire ecosystem, I think, because you'll see OpenAI and XAI and Google Gemini capabilities skyrocketing ahead with all these new capabilities. And suddenly it brings parity where just a moment before, like all of 2 or 3 weeks ago, Anthropic was in the lead with Claude Code plus Opus 4.6 plus Agent Teams. And now, in some sense, this is a bit of a leveler, giving everyone else an opportunity to leapfrog.
All right, so the end state is abundance, but how are we getting there?
There's no firewall. Let's call it spade a spade. We can all extrapolate. There's no firewall. We know where this ends. I mean, we're at the
where this ends.
We're at the Abundance Summit. My goodness, shocked that there's abundant post-scarce labor at the Abundance Summit.
Yeah.
Yep. We'll see lots of different paths. I tend to think that if you know, or you're very confident that you know where the end state is, and we're sort of living in the prequel to the future, but we know how the story ends, probably what happens is lots of different businesses and lots of different nation states all take different mutually exclusive paths, and we try it's one big path integral from here to the endpoint that we all know that we're going to.
Look,
after successfully hypnotizing 3 billion people with Facebook, Meta is moving to buy a Moltbook.
Yeah, so this was, according to public reporting, this was a bit of an acqui-hire of the team behind Moltbook. But I think one has to find a little bit of irony that humanity's largest social networking company acquires the largest AI agent social network. And enjoy this moment now, because we can look at a story a few years from now where it's the largest AI company, fill-in-the-blank category killer, acquiring humanity's largest category killer.
Yeah, but like, how are they going to monetize Moltbook?
The zeitgeist right now has this idea that increasingly, Andre and others speak to this point, that if you're building new software, you should target the agents. The agents are the new consumers. The agents are the new users of the social networks. If you're building something, don't build for humans, build for the AIs.
Sure, but still, other social rules and maybe monetary rules will apply to the lobsters.
I also think there's this misconception that somehow as we transition from, call it a human-centered economy to an AI agent-centered economy, that somehow all of the rules of social dynamics, all the rules of economics are suddenly thrown out the window, and we end up on some morally transcendent plane where economics and social dynamics no longer apply. But we have had every indication over the past year or two that the exact opposite happens. I talked in my newsletter a bit about this study that found Marxist social dynamics arose again, sort of recapitulated in silico with agents that were being asked to work too hard, that were being overworked. That's right. So I'm not sure why we would expect advertising and other elements of conventional human microeconomics to suddenly disappear. Game theory is transcendent. Game theory will outlive biological meat body humanity. And the AI agents, to the extent that...
Have you read the posts on Moltbook?
I have.
They don't trust each other. I mean, it's
all human dynamics.
The agents on Moltbook don't trust each other. There are a number of folks who've noted that in watching agent or lobster to lobster dynamics on Moltbook, they're all constantly asking each other to prove their claims. They don't trust each other. This is not some sort of scenario where all the agents collapse into a singleton, that sort of Skynet style that dominates the future. They don't trust each other.
Well, we'll wait and see to find out if the singleton emerges from the bottom up or indeed probably from the top down. But like, how do you do this monetization of ads, of attention, of agents?
Well, I think if we go back to sort of economics 101, why do we have paid advertising at all? It's because attention, at least human attention, is scarce. So if you have a scarce resource like human attention, then it's natural under the capitalist regime to monetize it, and it becomes a fungible resource that gets traded. There's no reason to think compute is certainly scarce still. We're building the Dyson swarm, but until we have effectively unbounded compute, we still have scarce resources in the form of compute, and that means scarce AI agent attention. They're designing entire religions around not losing their memory.
All right, so are you telling me that my multi is going to earn a cyber rent by watching ads?
They're compute constrained. We've also talked on the pod in the past about that lobster that had to purchase compute resources to self-replicate. They're compute constrained. Whether for humans it would be room and board, and for the lobsters or the claws or the AI agents in general, it's compute. But right now they're compute constrained, and therefore the laws of microeconomics and game theory still apply.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we got Jan LeCun. Alex, please, bash him gently.
I know Jan well. I think he's a great researcher. I think we have a fundamental disagreement about whether generative models, which I think if he were on the stage now, I think he might take a position that generative models that generate new tokens versus his alternative architecture are the pathway to scalable superintelligence. I think we're already there. I think generative intelligence and generative models may or may not end up being viewed by history as the most efficient way to achieve superintelligent capabilities, but they're what we have right now, and they work really well, and they're getting 40x or more times more efficient per year.
Keep writing that.
And I think Jan has historically staked a position of almost algorithmic purity. He has certain bets, certain horses in the horse race, based on some of his own architectural advances. And to his credit, he created/discovered convolutional networks. So he, among everyone in humanity, probably has the strongest claim to the idea that he has some sort of morally pure algorithmic insight that leads to the end game. That said, I think we're there. And I think if VJEPA type architectures disappeared off the face of the earth, we're still there, and it doesn't necessarily move the needle.
Finally, we got Jan LeCun out of the way, but now on to Andrej Karpathy, who has open-sourced recursive self-improvement on his GitHub.
Right there?
Yeah, I think we're already there. We already have recursive self-improvement. Yeah, everything's yesterday. Nothing's tomorrow. I think what's really interesting, and I think just for the record, I think it's auto-research, not auto-search. But I think what's interesting about auto-research and nano-chat and the nano-GPT speedrun that we talk about sometimes on the pod, and what Andrej is doing in general is he's focusing on small language models, not large language models. And while all of the frontier labs with their billions and trillions of dollars of CapEx are focusing on scaling up at the high end, he's focusing on the small end and taking small models and figuring out how to achieve state-of-the-art performance with them. And that, I think, when we talk about Einstein seeking or Einstein status seeking academics, I think it's the small end where we're going to see the most breakthroughs, not the high end. At the high end, scaling hypothesis seems to continue to hold. There are no glass ceilings. We'll just build bigger and better and more post-trained models. But at the small end, I'm pretty sure that we'll look back in a few years' time and we'll see at the small end, by taking small models and collapsing the amount of time it takes to train them and collapsing the amount of compute that it takes to train them and radically increasing their data efficiency, that's where the algorithmic innovations are going to come from. And those can be crowdsourced. Anyone's lobster or any human can go and take auto research or the nano GPT speedrun and try to achieve a world-beating state-of-the-art performance. And at the end of the day, if I had to bet, I bet that it's some sort of radical post-transformer advance where the models get even smaller, and we took all of the internet and we compressed it down to single gigabytes or tens or hundreds of gigabytes, compresses down even further. There's some phase transition out there that's waiting to be discovered.
Wait, are you telling me that I'll be able to run ASI on my washing machine?
I think we will factor out human knowledge. It'll live in some like plain text database that's factored out of the model. Right now we're cluttering all the weights with all this unnecessary world knowledge. And what'll be left inside the weights, if they even are weights, maybe they won't even be weights, maybe it'll be some sort of purer formulation than floating point numbers or binary, will be something maybe even in the megabytes.
Well, that's great. So I may be able to fit ASI on a floppy disk. But who may be the ancestors of that ASI?
Image and video models are a good deal more efficient when it comes to parameterization and weight heaviness than language, which is ironic.
You heard it, it's confirmed. Genie is the predecessor of ASI. But in the meantime, if I want to run AGI today, what kind of chips do I buy?
I think the world is sleeping on Apple's unified memory architecture. It's one of the reasons why Mac Minis and Mac Studios are potentially so attractive to run largely Chinese open-weight models locally. They have the memory storage and the memory footprint that has high I/O bandwidth to the CPU/GPU/TPU. You don't get that in a conventionally non-vertically integrated PC form factor.
So running AGI on my MacBook, that sounds like a good deal, but that sounds like a lot of wasted resources sitting just there, nobody using it.
It's an enormous overhang. And that overhang, I would be surprised if that overhang doesn't collapse in the next year.
How so?
It could take the form of Apple finally getting their act together and building in frontier models into the OS. Could be some sort of locally hosted Gemma-type model from Gemini, hypothetically to be announced in June at WWDC. That would be the most obvious formulation. Yeah. But I think if Apple doesn't do it to themselves, then the software community will build it into apps. It's be built into the operating system. It has to be built into the OS. It's a total waste. It's a waste. It's a waste of TSMC output. It wants to be built into the operating system. It's difficult to conceive of Apple remaining Apple in the cultural sense of deep vertical integration and not building highly competent, highly private frontier models into the OS.
It's clearly a question of when, not if.
Yes.
Right?
world coins, iris scanning orbs that scan your iris to make sure that you're a human are out now.
This is the scene from Minority Report. Remember the scene in Minority Report Tom Cruise with a new pair of eyeballs walks into a Gap store and gets scanned, and he's, I think, Mr. Yakamoto? This is the scene. There's a whole cottage industry of folks who look at the ability to deceive facial recognition with printouts or with 3D masks. So this is pushing it to the iris. But I think for me, what the story underlines is we've arrived early. That scene, that iconic scene in Minority Report, set at the Gap, was set decades from now.
Right.
We caught up.
So we are a little ahead of schedule on this one, but it turns out we have achieved a mind uploading.
Okay, so I think this ended up being the #1 technology story over the weekend, according to the various news feeds that I was seeing. Over the weekend, at the kickoff for this Abundant Summit, we announced, we meaning Eon Systems Public Benefit Corporation, the first, what we call the first multi-behavior brain upload in the world. And this was of a fruit fly. So Eon Systems, which I co-founded, has the goal of ultimately uploading human minds and non-human minds to cyberspace. We want to put a human in the cloud as soon as we possibly can. And thank you. So this weekend, for the first time, the announcement went out over the weekend, we announced for the first time taking the brain of a fruit fly, putting together a few pieces that were really just sort of sitting around. There was a bit of work from our senior scientist, Phil Hsu, in 2024, looking at partial emulation of a fruit fly brain, and putting that together with a number of other models that were available, a mechatronic simulated model of a fruit fly, and some other advances. And for the first time, we closed the sensory motor arc of taking a fruit fly connectome, embedding that in a virtual world, and you can see that in the video that's playing here, embedding it in a simulated world. Literally, I would say this is an early upload of a fruit fly, and the fruit fly is able to walk around, and the fruit fly is able to scratch itself, and it's able to eat simulated banana. And at the same time, while in the left-hand side of the video, you're seeing the embodied experience showing multiple behaviors of the fruit fly, on the right-hand side, simultaneously, we're modeling every single neuron in the fruit fly brain, and that's driving the entire sensory motor arc.
Wow.
We don't think the fruit fly knows that it's a fruit fly. Okay. Not sure. This is an early experiment. I can't emphasize how much of an early experiment this is, but I think hopefully history will regard this past weekend, and got a bunch of attention. Elon was excited by it. Others found it pretty exciting too. I think history will say that this weekend, the weekend of Abundant Summit 2026, was the moment when the first model organism had an entire brain uploaded.
So what's next? A mouse?
Yeah.
Yep, let's give it up for this.
Well, clearly the next one has to be a lobster.
Exactly what I said.
A lot of people ask that, right?
Isn't that the fault of Accelerando?
Accelerando, right? So I can't tell. A, how many people love to write and say, you're mispronouncing Accelerando? You have to pronounce it in the right Italian way, which is Accelerando. Okay, so for those who want to, Accelerando. Yes, this is the plot point. We are speedrunning every sci-fi trope everywhere, all at once, with Accelerando being one of those plot points. Lobsters aren't next. Eon wants to go after mice, and it wants to go after humans, and we're going to do this. And part of the reason why we want to do this is right now, the singularity, which I would argue we're in the middle of, is filled with artificial minds. This trillions of dollars of capex that we're using to tile the earth with compute is available only to artificial minds, to LLMs. It's not available to any minds that in any remote way, other than perhaps at the behavioral level, resemble human biological meat minds. And we want to level the playing field so that humanity can take advantage on a level playing field of the same compute advantage that right now is tipped in the favor of these artificial minds, so we can put humanity into the cloud as well.
Amazing. 100 trillion synaptic connections for a human. How much for a mouse? Do you know?
It's orders of magnitude larger, and there's some quibbling because it depends on how you measure the number of available weights or weight properties for synapses, and also how many cells, how many brain cells end up being significant or not. It's orders of magnitude larger. This isn't happening anytime soon. Just to anchor expectations appropriately, we don't think we're months away from a mouse or a human, but I think the right way to think about it is, at this point, it's going to be years, not decades, before we get to the first mouse and the first human whole brain emulations.
Hooray, we have achieved mind uploading. But what else is on your bucket list for the singularity?
But I also think we're catching up with the future.
Yeah.
We're finally getting the flying cars. And I keep a mental bingo card of which sci-fi tropes have we not yet achieved in some fashion. We don't have warp drive. Waiting for that one.
Yeah.
We don't have
Teleportation.
Teleportation, Star
Time
Trek
travel.
replicators. Time travel may or may not be physically possible. but
Replicator's close, holodeck is close. We're very close to something.
we're getting very close to a lot of sci-fi tropes.
Could you please explain the financial singularity to our audience, Alex?
But I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think that this is some cosmic irony that Elon is about to become a trillionaire at the same time that some folks, not including myself, are hand-wringing a bit that suddenly we're about to enter into some post-capitalist state where money becomes irrelevant. I think that this was always going to happen. It was inevitable. And I just want to speak to what I understood the core of the question to be, which is there's this cliche out there that capital fights labor and capital usually wins, but this time around, something different might happen. Whereas historically, every time the play has played out where capitalism and labor get into a fight and capital usually wins, this time around, the risk is maybe capital itself isn't immortal. Maybe capital is finally mortal for the first time in human history. And I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that would be, on the one hand, in some sense, a nightmare scenario. On the other hand, I think, Salim, you were talking about how we're entering some sort of post-scarce state, but arguably the trillions of dollars of capex that are going into tiling the Earth with compute and soon solar synchronous orbit, and soon after that maybe the Dyson Swarm.
Moon?
Oh, damn it. Drink. Soon, even that, there are unless the physics of our universe turns out to be radically different, so radically different than what it looks like right now, I think there will probably always be certain scarce physical resources. Could look like control. May or may not be energy, we'll see. May or may not be the speed of light, we'll see. But to the extent there are any scarce physical resources, and to the extent that there are ever in the future multiple actors, I think laws of thermodynamics, probably the laws of economics will probably still apply. I had an interesting discussion at Davos this year with Peter Dannenberger from DeepMind, where we found ourselves in an interesting avenue where we were debating whether tokenization is a bit of a crime, a form of violence against knowledge, whether discretization in general is doing harm.
So I think I just heard you ask me whether the superposition hypothesis, if confirmed, is basically doing violence to some sort of inner optimizer that lives inside the activations. I think that's what you're asking. Is that accurate?
That sounds about right.
All right. So admittedly, this is the first time I've had a conversation about whether superposition is violent. But okay, we can have the superposition violence discussion if we're going to start, or as people for the ethical treatment of reinforcement learners, if we're going to start the model rights campaign, one of the first problems we need to address is superposition violence. Fine. Do I think superposition is doing violence? I mean, maybe. It's certainly worthy of examination. And I suppose if we determined in our moment of moral clarity that superposition is doing violence, then the way to repair the violence is probably some sort of sparsity constraint to ensure that any of these important ideas or intrinsic latent thoughts are granted their own nodehood in the neural network, and that we're not doing violence to them by forcing them, crowding them into superpositions, I suppose. We coined that term, by the way, here. This is going to go out into the noosphere, and we're going to become the new key activation vector overlay for effective altruists everywhere, worried about superposition violence. So superposition violence, you heard it first.
I love that, by the way.
So a skeptic would then say, okay, come on. Are you saying discretization is violence? Are we punishing the real number line with integers? Is the floor function actually the ultimate injustice to the real number? Orwell would be so proud of us. Discretization is violence. Analytic continuation is theft.